You check your phone before you even open your eyes. Not because there's something urgent, not because someone needs you, but because the silence of your own mind, unguarded, unfiltered, completely alone, is the one place you've been quietly, carefully avoiding for years. Think about that for a second. The average person will spend roughly 11 years over their lifetime staring at a screen. 11 years, and most of it, if we're honest, is not curiosity. It's an escape. It's the digital equivalent of pressing your hands against your ears and humming so you don't have to hear the noise inside. And the noise inside isn't rage, it isn't grief, it isn't even sadness exactly. It's a question you can't answer and can't stop asking. Who am I? Is this all there is? Am I doing this right? Does any of it even matter? You've been taught, by school, by your parents, by every self-improvement algorithm that has ever found its way onto your feed, that those questions are problems to be solved, that the anxiety you feel is a malfunction, that the right formula, the right morning routine, the right mindset framework will eventually deliver you to some stable, solid, certain version of yourself, and you've been chasing that version your entire life. This video is a direct examination of why that chase is destroying you, and what happens when you finally stop running. This is not about learning to be more disciplined, more productive, or more optimized. This is about a French nobleman who sat alone in a tower in the 16th century, looked directly into the abyss of his own contradictions, and walked out the other side, lighter. His name was Michel de Montaigne, and what he figured out 500 years ago, before therapy, before neuroscience, before the entire self-help industrial complex was born, is still the most radical act of psychological freedom available to any human being alive today. But here's the thing I need you to understand before we go any further. What Montaigne discovered, the core of it, is going to feel wrong at first. It's going to feel like giving up, like weakness, like the laziest possible answer to the hardest possible question. Because the world has spent your entire life teaching you the exact opposite. And what I'm about to show you, this one specific shift in how you relate to your own mind, will not just change how you think. It will change what you're willing to carry, what you're willing to fight for, and most powerfully, though, what you're finally willing to put down. Stay with me, because the real revelation in Montaigne's philosophy isn't the one most people talk about. It's buried deeper, and we're going to find it together. Let me take you back, not to Montaigne's tower yet, back to you, somewhere, sometime before you were old enough to have the language for it. You learned a rule so embedded, so pre-verbal, so woven into the fabric of your early life that you never even recognized it as a rule. The rule was this: uncertainty is dangerous. Maybe it came from a household where things changed without warning. A parent's mood, the family's finances, the stability of love itself. So your nervous system learned to scan constantly for what might shift next. Hypervigilance dressed up as preparation. Maybe it came from school, from the culture of right answers, from the terror of raising your hand and being wrong in front of everyone, from the unspoken but ironclad message that not knowing was the same as being less than. Maybe it came later, from a relationship that fell apart, from a career plan that collapsed, from a moment when you trusted the future, and the future lied to you. And your psyche, trying to protect you, made a quiet vow: never again. Next time I'll know for certain. However, it arrived early, and it hardened. And now, decades later, that hardened thing is running your life. It is why you replay conversations at 2 in the morning, editing your words for an audience that has long since stopped thinking about you. It is why you research decisions that don't need research. Not to gather data, but to feel like you've covered every angle, as nothing can surprise you. It is why you stay in situations that are slowly suffocating you. because at least they're known situations. The devil you know. This is the original wound, not trauma in the cinematic sense, not always. More often, it's quieter than that. It's the 1,000 small moments that taught a developing mind that the world rewards those who have it together and punishes those who admit they don't. Montaigne, incredibly, understood this architecture centuries before Freud put a name on any of it. He grew up in a time of catastrophic uncertainty. 16th century France was not a stable country. Religious civil wars were tearing the continent apart. Plague arrived without announcement. Death was not an abstract concept. It was a neighbor, and the philosophical traditions available to him, Stoicism, Christianity, Scholasticism, all offered the same fundamental prescription for human suffering. Control your mind. Master your passions. Achieve certainty through reason or through faith. And for a while, Montaigne tried. He was a magistrate, a politician, a man of position in public life. He performed competently. He performed with certainty. And then, at 38 years old, he walked away from all of it, locked himself in a tower surrounded by his books, and decided to do something no philosopher before him had ever quite done. He decided to watch himself, not to fix himself, not to become a better version of himself, just to watch. What do I actually think? What do I actually feel? What do I actually know when I strip away everything I'm supposed to know? The answer he found was so disorienting and so liberating that it became the foundation of an entirely new way of being human. Before we get to what Montaigne found, I need to show you what not finding it costs. Because you might think the price of living with constant uncertainty avoidance is just anxiety. A little background hum of dread. Something manageable. It isn't. The cost is architectural. It restructures your entire life from the inside out. Think about the last time someone asked for your opinion, a real one, on something that mattered, and you gave them the diplomatic version instead. The considered, balanced, nobody can disagree with this version. Not because you didn't have a real opinion, but because having a real opinion means being wrong, and being wrong means someone will see exactly how uncertain you actually are. So you gave them the diplomatic version, and a tiny piece of your own voice went quiet. Think about the relationship you stayed in, or the job, or the city, or the friendship. Not because it was good, but because leaving required tolerating a period of not knowing what came next. And not knowing felt more unbearable than the slow erosion of what you had. So you stayed, and something that could have been transformed just continued. Think about the conversation you need to have, the one that's been sitting in your chest for months, maybe years, that you keep postponing because you can't predict how it ends. You can't script the other person's response. You can't guarantee the outcome, so you say nothing. And the relationship that conversation might have saved slowly, quietly fossilizes. This is what uncertainty avoidance actually takes from you, not your peace of mind, your choices. It is the most expensive tax in human psychology, and almost nobody names it. Because it doesn't look like suffering, it looks like caution, it looks like wisdom, it looks like being responsible. But what it really is a life lived in permanent rehearsal, always getting ready to live, never quite living. And here's the part that should unsettle you the most. The certainty you're buying with all of this sacrifice, it isn't real. You never actually get it. The control you think you're accumulating, the plans, the backups, the contingencies, the obsessive research, the people-pleasing that keeps everyone non-threatening, the identity polishing that makes you look like someone who has it figured out, none of it delivers what it promises. The anxiety doesn't go away when you get the answer. It just relocates to the next question. The sense of being on solid ground doesn't come from eliminating uncertainty. And Montaigne, sitting alone in his tower with 400 years less technology and infinitely more honesty than most of us, will ever allow ourselves figured that out in the most unexpected way possible. He stopped trying to be consistent. And that's where everything changed. But how exactly do you stop trying to be consistent without falling apart? The answer is more counterintuitive than you think, and it will redefine every relationship you have. Here is the sentence that cracked everything open. Montaigne wrote it in the second book of his essay, quietly, almost casually, as if it were obvious. I study myself more than any other subject. It is my metaphysics. It is my physics. Listen again. Not I study the world to understand myself. Not I study other people to figure out who I'm supposed to be. I study myself. This is not self-obsession. It is the opposite. Because what Montaigne found when he turned the lens inward, honestly, without the pressure to find the right answer, was not a stable, coherent, definitive self. He found something plural, fluid, alive. He found that he was afraid of death and also oddly unbothered by it, that he loved solitude and also craved conversation, that the man who wrote a chapter about constancy could not maintain the same opinion across 2 consecutive winters, that he was generous and petty, confident and terrified, erudite and completely ignorant, sometimes within the same afternoon. And instead of experiencing this as a crisis, instead of labeling it as a disorder or a failure or evidence that he wasn't trying hard enough, he did something genuinely radical. He wrote it down, published it, and called it wisdom. He permitted us to be contradictory. He permitted us not to know. Not as a destination, not as something you arrive at after all the work is done, but as a starting point, as the ground you stand on, as the most honest thing you can say about being alive. What do I know? Montaigne's personal motto, engraved in the beams of his library ceiling. Not as despair, but as a philosophy, as a daily reminder that the requirement to have everything figured out is not an insight. It's a cage. And this is where the psychology becomes surgical. Because the thing that most people call self-confidence isn't confidence at all. It's performance. It's the elaborate, exhausting, full-time job of managing other people's perception of your stability. Real authority, the internal kind, looks nothing like that. Real internal authority is what happens when you stop outsourcing your sense of self to certainty. When your identity is no longer a position you have to defend. When you're not invested in being right so much as you're committed to being honest. The person who says, I don't know, let me think about that, not as a hedge, not as false modesty, but as a genuine invitation to inquiry. That person is immovable. Not because they're rigid, but because they're not afraid of the ground shifting beneath them. They've already made peace with the shifting. Montaigne called this living appropriately, vivre à propos. And it sounds gentle, almost passive, but what it requires is an act of courage that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. It requires you to let your internal experience be your primary reference point, not the opinion of the room, not the prescription of the culture, not the voice in your head that's been narrating your inadequacy since childhood. Just what's actually true for you right now in this moment. That's it. That's the whole shift. But here's what nobody tells you about making that shift. It doesn't happen in a moment of inspiration. It doesn't happen because you watched a video and it resonated. It happens in a specific kind of collision. And what gets destroyed in that collision is something you've been protecting your entire life. We're almost there. But first, let me show you what this shift actually looks like when it lands in real life. The first thing that changes, and this will feel strange, is silence. Specifically, your relationship with it. You stop filling every gap. You stop needing the background noise. You stop reaching for the phone in the elevator, in the line at the grocery store, in the 30 seconds between one task and the next. Not because you've become a monk, but because silence stops feeling threatening. Before the shift, silence was where the questions lived. And the questions were accusations. Am I enough? Am I wasting my life? What if everything I've built is wrong? So you kept the noise up. Always something to listen to, always something to react to, always enough stimulation to keep the questions from getting too loud. After the shift, silence is where you live. Because you're no longer running from the questions, you're sitting with them. You've accepted that they may not have answers, and that this is not a catastrophe, that a life well examined is not a life with all the answers. It's a life that knows how to be in the presence of uncertainty without being dismantled by it. The second thing that changes is your conversations. You will notice with uncomfortable precision how many conversations you've been having from behind a shield. How much of what you say is not communication, but management. Managing impressions. Managing conflict, managing the space between what you actually think and what you think they want to hear. Montaigne's conversations, his written ones at least, had none of this. He would argue one position beautifully and then, in the same essay, dismantle it. He would admit ignorance, contradict himself, follow a digression for 3 pages and then forget to return to the original point. And somehow, because of all of this, not despite it, his writing reads as the most honest company you've ever kept. Because authenticity, genuine human authenticity, does not look like someone who has it all together. It looks like someone who isn't pretending. And when you stop pretending, something shifts in the room. People feel it. They lean in. They lower their own shields slightly. Conversations that used to skate across the surface start to go somewhere. Not because you got more impressive, because you got more real. The third change, and this one is the one that accumulates over time into something enormous, is your relationship with failure. Before the shift, failure was evident. Evidence of your fundamental inadequacy, of the gap between who you are and who you're supposed to be. So you either avoided failure at all costs, staying in the shallow end of every pool, or you failed and then spent weeks, months, sometimes years prosecuting yourself in the court of your own mind. Montaigne, a man who lost his best friend, his position, several children, and more than a few convictions, understood failure differently. He understood it as information, not pleasant information, not information you'd have chosen, but information about the nature of things, about the gap between expectation and reality, about where your model of the world was incomplete. He wrote about his failures with the same careful, curious attention he brought to everything else about himself. Not punishing, not performing humility, just noticing. What happened? What does that tell me? What changes? This is the posture of a person who has internalized Montaigne's core insight. Nothing that happens to you is a verdict on your worth. It's just what happened. And here is the compounding return on this posture. Over the years, over decades, the person who isn't afraid of failure has an entirely different relationship with risk. Not recklessness. Montaigne was not reckless, but genuine, considered, wide-eyed willingness to act in the absence of certainty. To start the thing before you feel ready. To have the conversation before you know how it ends. To commit to something fully, knowing that it might not work. And the life that person builds over time has a texture and a depth that no amount of optimization can replicate. Because it is a life that was actually lived, not managed. But there's one final piece, the piece that most people, even after they understand everything I've just said, still miss. Because understanding this intellectually is easy. Living it is something else entirely. The reason most people can't make this shift permanent, can't hold it under pressure, comes down to one specific thing. And it's the thing Montaigne himself identified as the hidden engine of all human restlessness. We're almost at the end, and what's coming next will reframe everything. Here it is. The thing I told you was buried. The thing I've been building toward. Montaigne's deepest insight, the one that doesn't make it into the summary versions, the one that requires the whole architecture of his thinking to support, is this. The self is not a problem to be solved. Listen again. The self, yourself, is not a project, not a construction site, not something broken that philosophy or therapy or discipline or the right framework will eventually complete. It is an experience to be inhabited. And this distinction between solving and inhabiting is the difference between a life of permanent low-grade psychological war and something that actually resembles peace. Think about how you've been approaching yourself. Every book you've read is about becoming better. Every habit you've tried to build, every version of yourself you've chased. More focused, more disciplined, more confident, more emotionally regulated, more present, more successful. What is the implicit premise underneath all of that? The premise is, as I am right now, I am not enough. The premise is, there is a gap between the self I have and the self I need. And my job is to close it. And this premise, this deeply culturally embedded, almost universally accepted premise, is precisely what Montaigne spent his entire life in the tower dismantling. Not because self-improvement is meaningless, not because growth isn't real, but because as long as you are fundamentally in opposition to what you are, right now, today, in all your inconsistency and contradiction and incompleteness, you cannot actually be present for your own life. You're too busy managing the renovation. You're so focused on building the next version of yourself that you keep missing the current one. And the current one, this person today, reading, thinking, living, is the only self that actually exists. The future self you're always preparing for? They're a fiction, a useful fiction sometimes, but a fiction. Montaigne sat in that tower and did something that most people will never do. He decided that the version of himself he had, confused, contradictory, aging, inconsistent, deeply human, was enough to be worth writing about, worth examining, worth taking seriously, not worth celebrating in every way, not perfect, but real. And real, he decided, was sufficient. Sufficient, not optimal, not maximized, sufficient. And from that position, from the almost scandalous act of accepting himself as a legitimate subject of interest without needing to be a finished product first, everything else followed. The lack of pretension, the humor, the fearlessness of the essays, the ability to write about death and pain and stupidity and desire and grief and joy with equal honesty, because none of those experiences threatened a self that was never trying to be anything other than what it was. This is what the art of not giving a fuck actually means. Not the social media version. The I don't care what people think performance that is, ironically, the most self-conscious posture imaginable. The real version. The version where you're so fundamentally, groundedly, unapologetically present in your own experience, so committed to inhabiting the actual texture of your actual life, that the need to control how it looks from the outside simply loses its urgency. Not overnight, not completely, not without days when the old hunger for certainty comes roaring back, but in the direction, steadily, irreversibly. Because once you've tasted what it feels like to be genuinely in your life, not managing it, not narrating it, not optimizing it, but actually fully in it, nothing else satisfies. Montaigne died in 1592. In his final days, he did not summon a priest for the conventional last rites. He had a mass set at his bedside with guests. He was, by most accounts, curious and clear-eyed and present to the end. He had spent 30 years studying himself, 30 years filling pages with questions, contradictions, half-finished thoughts, abandoned certainties, revised opinions, honest fears. He never found the answers he set out looking for. He found something better. He found that the questions themselves, lived with, sat with, befriended, were enough to make a life worth having. He found that a human being who has given themselves full permission to be human, incomplete, unknowing, changing, afraid, alive, is not a lesser version of what a person can be. It is, in fact, the fullest one. So here is where I leave you, not with an answer. Montaigne would not allow me to, but with something more durable than an answer, a question, and permission to sit with it. What are you managing right now that you might instead simply let be? What version of yourself have you been postponing your actual life for? What would change, not out there but inside, if you stopped treating your own uncertainty as a malfunction and started treating it as evidence that you are, in fact, a living thing? The freedom Montaigne found was not the freedom from difficulty. It was freedom from the obligation to be anything other than honestly, completely, curiously himself. That freedom is available to you. Not when you figure it out, right now. If something in this landed for you, if you felt something shift even slightly, I want to hear it. Not the polished version, the real one. Drop it in the comments below because these conversations matter and because someone else reading your words tonight might find exactly what they need in them. And if you're not subscribed, hit that button. Because what we're building here is not a content library. It's a different way of thinking about what it means to be a person. The next video goes somewhere darker and more necessary than this one. Don't miss it.